Imagine a black kid from a low-rent apartment swearing his father is a four-star general. It was the most outlandish tall tale she'd heard in 23 years of teaching, and Mrs. Patricia Whitmore didn't keep it to herself. She announced it to her entire fourth-grade class at Jefferson Elementary. Then, she plucked Lucas Hughes's meticulously written assignment from his desk and tore it clean in two. The sharp rip of paper cut through the quiet room. She tore it again, and then again, letting the pieces flutter down onto Lucas's scuffed-up sneakers. "We don't invent fantasies about being important, Lucas. A general's family lives in a mansion. His kids are enrolled in private academies. They are driven around in luxury cars." Her tone turned to ice. "They most certainly do not arrive at school looking, well, the way you do." 10-year-old Lucas just stood there, completely frozen, his small hands starting to tremble as every pair of eyes in the classroom fixed on him. She balled up the shredded paper and tossed it into the trash can. Utterly pathetic. Have you ever seen a teacher systematically crush a child's spirit simply for being black and telling the absolute truth? Just 2 hours before, Lucas Hughes had woken to the sound of his dad's voice booming from the first floor. "Chow time in 5, soldier." The Hughes family resided in a perfectly normal 3-bedroom apartment over in Arlington, Virginia. It was so near Fort Myer that on a clear morning with the windows open, you could just make out the sound of the bugle call. Their furniture was well kept, but had seen better days. And while the walls were filled with family pictures, there wasn't a single thing that screamed military. You wouldn't find any displayed uniforms, framed medals, or commemorative flags and plaques. It was all about security protocol. General Vincent Hughes was not one to broadcast his profession. Down in the kitchen, Lucas saw his father at the table, dressed casually in jeans and a Georgetown hoodie. To any casual observer, he was just another suburban dad, maybe a history teacher or some kind of office manager. His mother, Dr. Angela Hughes, was already in her scrubs, pouring coffee before an early shift in surgery over at Walter Reed. Taped to the refrigerator was a child's crayon masterpiece depicting a stick figure in a uniform adorned with 4 stars on each shoulder. Right beside it, a calendar showed today's date, Friday, circled in a bold red marker with the words, Parent Career Day. Lucas was beaming. He'd been counting down the days for this. "Dad, am I allowed to tell them about when you went to see the president?" General Hughes shot a look at his wife, and Angela returned it with one of her own. It was the one that silently argued their son shouldn't have to live under a veil of secrets. "Lucas, you remember our conversation, don't you? Certain things have to remain confidential for safety reasons, but every other kid gets to show off what their parents do. I'm aware of that, son." Vincent's tone was soft, yet unwavering. "Our situation is unique. We have to maintain a low profile. Do you get it?" Lucas gave a small nod, but he didn't really get it. Not completely. How come other kids could feel proud when he was supposed to keep quiet? From across the table, Angela reached out and gave her husband's hand a reassuring squeeze. "He has a right to be proud of you, Vincent." "I know," the general said, turning his gaze to his son. "Just don't overdo it tomorrow, all right? You have absolutely nothing to prove to a single soul." Lucas polished off his cereal and went upstairs to get his things for school. He had no idea that in fewer than 12 hours, keeping it simple would no longer be an option. Jefferson Elementary was situated right in the center of Arlington. The school was a true melting pot, constantly seeing military families cycle in and out alongside the children of diplomats from nearby embassies. There were kids from immigrant families striving for a piece of the American dream, and the children of working-class parents who cleaned the very buildings where national policy was forged. On paper, it was a place where every student was meant to be valued equally. However, Mrs. Patricia Whitmore had been a fixture there for 23 years, and over that time she had developed an unshakable conviction about which kids told the truth and which ones were just telling stories. Her classroom walls were a shrine to her own values. The American flag, framed pictures of her with local politicians, and numerous certificates for teaching excellence. She wore a small flag pin on her lapel every single day. Despite never having served a day in the armed forces, lived abroad, or worked anywhere but a comfortable suburban school, she was utterly convinced she knew what the family of a general was supposed to look like. And Lucas Hughes did not match that image in her mind. As the morning announcements began, Principal Hayes's voice crackled over the school's intercom system. A very good morning to you, Jefferson Elementary. This is your reminder that Parent Career Day is happening today. We are so pleased to host some truly distinguished guests with us, so please give them your warmest welcome. The mood inside Mrs. Whitmore's classroom instantly changed. A boy named Tyler Bennett, whose father was a well-known lobbyist on Capitol Hill, shot his hand into the air. Mrs. Whitmore, my dad is having meetings with 3 different senators about the new infrastructure bill this week. My, how impressive, Tyler. Her face radiated approval. Contributing to public service is such a vital part of our democracy. Next, a Latina girl named Sophia Wilson raised her hand timidly. My mom works over there as well. She's on the crew that cleans all the offices late at night after everybody else has gone home. How nice for her, Sophia. Mrs. Whitmore offered a smile that was all teeth. All right, everyone, please turn to page 42 in your textbooks. Lucas observed the whole exchange, a familiar scene he knew by heart. Some kids were met with praise, while others were simply ignored. It all came down to whose parents had the most impressive job or the biggest bank account. At precisely 10 o'clock, Mrs. Whitmore began the day's assignment. Class, I'd like you to compose 3 paragraphs focusing on your parents' professions. What is it they do? Why is it significant? And how does their work benefit our town? She asked while pacing between the rows of desks. This needs to be completed before our guests are here. And please, use your neatest handwriting. In an instant, the class fell silent as students hunched over their work. Lucas fished out his pencil and started to write, forming each word in meticulous block letters. My father is a 4-star general in the United States Army. He has dedicated 32 years to defending our country everywhere from Iraq and Afghanistan to Korea, making critical choices to keep our nation safe. In the entire military, there are only about 40 generals who hold that rank. My dad started as a 2nd lieutenant and earned his way up. He taught me that leadership is about serving others, not yourself. My father has been deployed 6 different times. Sometimes months pass without me seeing him, but he makes that sacrifice because he loves this country. That is what gives his job its meaning. Deshaun Williams, Lucas's closest friend, leaned in close and whispered, "Hey, is that true? Your dad's really a general?" Lucas nodded, his voice barely audible. "Yeah, but he's really humble about it." Deshaun's eyes widened. "That is unbelievably cool. My dad just works on cars over at the garage." "My dad always says every single job is important," Lucas whispered back. "Your dad helps keep people from getting into accidents. That matters a lot too." Deshaun broke into a grin, just as a large shadow fell over Lucas's desk. It was Mrs. Whitmore, standing right over him. She leaned in, her eyes scanning the page over his shoulder. Her mouth tightened into a thin, hard line, and Lucas felt a knot of dread form in his stomach. Her expression conveyed total disbelief, a look that called him a liar without saying a word. But she stayed quiet. For now, she simply strolled back to her desk and scribbled a quick note in her planner. As the morning crawled by, Lucas's phone buzzed from inside his backpack. The school had a policy allowing emergency devices, and his was an older smartphone just for contacting his parents. He pulled it out during a bathroom break and saw a text from his mom. "Dad's flying home from Korea early. His plane lands at Reagan at 3 p.m. tomorrow. He's going to be at Career Day after all. Let's keep it a surprise." Lucas's spirit soared. It had been 3 long weeks since his dad had left for Korea. He was there for some high-level strategic meetings that were classified, but now he was coming home ahead of schedule. He would actually be there. Lucas had the urge to scream the news from the top of the school. Instead, he quietly put the phone away and walked back to class, completely unaware of Mrs. Whitmore's sharp eyes tracking his every move from her desk. He didn't catch the deep-seated skepticism in her look. She had already decided what kind of boy Lucas Hughes was. He was a liar. And tomorrow, she intended to teach him a very public lesson about the importance of telling the truth. She had no way of knowing that in less than 24 hours, a four-star general was going to walk through her door and completely shatter every single thing she believed about Lucas Hughes. An unusual current of excitement was in the air at Jefferson Elementary the next morning. At 8:30, parents started to file into Mrs. Whitmore's classroom. There was a lawyer in a crisp suit, an architect holding a set of blueprints, a software developer, and a chef in his kitchen whites. A nurse, who was still in the scrubs she'd worn for the night shift, was also there. Mrs. Whitmore's greetings varied wildly in their warmth. For the lawyer, she had a firm handshake and a brilliant smile. The chef received a polite nod, while the nurse got a hurried, "Thank you for what you do," before the teacher pivoted to adjust some chairs. Lucas sat anxiously at his desk, glancing at his phone every 30 seconds. His father had sent a text at 6 o'clock that morning. "Just landed, going to get some sleep. I'll see you at school by 10 o'clock. Proud of you, son. 2 more hours." Lucas just had to get through 2 more hours. "All right, class." Mrs. Whitmore clapped her hands together for attention. "Before our guests begin their presentations, let's share some of the paragraphs you all wrote. I want our visitors to hear the wonderful way you've all described their professions." One after another, kids got up to read. Tyler Bennett described his father's lobbying company and all the important laws they helped pass. Mrs. Whitmore was beaming. Then, Sophia Wilson read about her mother's cleaning business and the great pride she took in her work. Mrs. Whitmore gave her a tight, brief smile before quickly moving on. And then she called Lucas's name. "Lucas Hughes, you can go next." Lucas got to his feet, the paper rattling slightly in his hands. He cleared his throat and started to read. "My dad is a 4-star general in the United States Army. For 32 years, he has served our country in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Korea. He helps make critical decisions that are designed to keep America safe." The moment he spoke, Mrs. Whitmore's expression soured. "There are only about 44-star generals in the whole of the armed forces. My dad climbed the ranks all the way from second lieutenant. He always says, leadership means serving others, not yourself." "Stop." The word cut through the classroom silence like a crack of thunder. Every student froze. Parents looked up, startled from their phones. Mrs. Whitmore rose deliberately from her desk. "Lucas, would you come to the front, please?" Lucas's legs felt like jelly as he made the long walk up the aisle, his heart thumping against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Class," Mrs. Whitmore announced, her voice adopting that familiar, stern lecture tone. "This situation is a perfect lesson in what we call embellishment." Her eyes locked onto him. "Lucas, I need you to be completely honest with everyone here. What is it your father actually does for a living?" "He's a general, ma'am." Her eyes narrowed into thin slits. "Lucas, I have been an educator for 23 years. I have met generals. I have taught the children of generals." She folded her arms across her chest. "Generals do not reside in modest rental apartments. Their children don't come to public school wearing scuffed, worn-out sneakers. Their families are established figures in the community. There are public records, social functions, a certain level of recognition." Lucas could feel the heat rising in his face. "But ma'am, my dad keeps a low profile because..." "Because of what? Secret missions?" Her voice was laced with unconcealed sarcasm. A few students let out nervous snickers. Tyler Bennett put his hand up. "Mrs. Whitmore, maybe his dad actually is..." "Tyler, I appreciate your impulse to be kind, but this is a teachable moment." She turned her full attention back to Lucas. "I consulted the office yesterday. There is no General Hughes in our parent directory. Your father's job is listed as government employee. That's quite a world away from a 4-star general, isn't it?" Lucas's eyes began to sting with tears. "He has to put that on the forms. For security reasons." "That is enough." The entire classroom flinched at the sudden sharpness in her voice. You will take your seat this instant. You will redo this assignment with the actual truth, and you will apologize to the class and our guests for taking up our time with your fantasies. Is that understood?" Tears finally spilled over and ran down his cheeks, but he remained frozen in place. "Lucas," I said, "sit down." "My dad didn't raise a liar, ma'am." The room fell into a dead, shocked silence. A deep, blotchy red flush crept up Mrs. Whitmore's neck. A few of the visiting parents shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. "What did you just say to me?" "My dad is a general. He's flying in from Korea. He'll be here at 10 o'clock. You'll see." Mrs. Whitmore's jaw was clenched so tight it was a wonder she could speak. "Principal's office. Now." Deshaun Williams suddenly stood up. "But Mrs. Whitmore, Lucas isn't lying. I've seen—" "Deshaun, you sit down right now before you're joining him." Deshaun collapsed back his seat, throwing Lucas a look of pure apology. Lucas grabbed his backpack. As he turned toward the door, Mrs. Whitmore delivered her parting shot, making sure her voice was loud enough to carry. "Class, let this serve as a lesson for all of you. Honesty and humility are virtues we should all cherish. Pretending to be more important than you are, especially considering certain backgrounds, is the very opposite of good character." Lucas paused in the doorway. His fingers dug into the straps of his backpack with enough force to leave deep marks. He could feel every eye in the room on him as he made his walk of shame. He had 90 minutes until his father's plane landed. 90 minutes to stew in the humiliation of being called a liar in front of the whole world. He had no clue that Mrs. Whitmore was on the verge of experiencing the single worst day of her entire teaching career. The school hallway had never felt so long. Lucas moved slowly toward the main office, the squeak of his sneakers echoing on the polished floor. Behind him, he could just make out Mrs. Whitmore's voice restarting the career day program as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just shattered his world in front of everyone he knew. He checked his phone, but there were still no messages from his dad. He was probably fast asleep after that brutal 14-hour flight from Korea. Lucas considered sending a text, trying to explain the disaster that had just unfolded. But how would he even phrase it? That his teacher had publicly humiliated him? That no one believed a word he said? His dad had enough stress to deal with. Lucas didn't want to come off as weak. He slid the phone back into his jeans and kept walking. Through the office window, Lucas could see Principal Hayes on the phone. She was nodding along to the conversation, her face a mask of concentration. Her gaze dropped to a folder on her desk for a moment, then lifted, her eyes meeting his through the glass partition. Her eyes widened for a split second, a flicker of recognition, but she was in the middle of a call. She gave him a curt nod and turned back to her conversation. Lucas wondered if Mrs. Whitmore had already phoned ahead to poison the well. As it turned out, Vice Principal Thornton was the one who handled the meeting. Principal Hayes was still tied up on her call, her office door shut. Mr. Thornton was a man in his 50s who had been at Jefferson Elementary for at least 15 years. He was wearing his usual uniform of khaki pants and a blue polo shirt embroidered with the school's logo. He possessed the kind of face that seemed permanently fixed in a state of mild disappointment. "Sit down, Lucas." Lucas slipped into the chair opposite Thornton's desk. It was far too large for him. His feet dangled a few inches off the ground. "So," Thornton started, opening a file, "Mrs. Whitmore informs me that you were disruptive in class and refused to amend some false information on an assignment." "Sir, it wasn't false. My dad really—" Lucas started, but Thornton held up a hand to stop him. "I've pulled your file. Your father is listed as Vincent Hughes. Occupation, government employee. That is what our official system says. That's what he's required to put on forms, sir. It's a security protocol." Thornton let out a small, disbelieving chuckle. It wasn't a mean sound, but the kind a grown-up makes to indulge a child's fantasy. "Lucas, I get that you want your father to sound like a big deal. A lot of children feel that way. But inventing these grand tales about generals and classified operations isn't the way to do it." "I'm not inventing it." The words burst out of Lucas, far louder than he'd intended. The principal's lenient expression vanished. Lower your tone. You're on thin ice as it is, son. Don't make it any thinner. Just then, Lucas's phone vibrated in his pocket. He snatched it out. A text from his dad appeared on the screen. Running behind. Pentagon briefing got pushed up. We'll be there by 10:30. Hang tight. Relief surged through Lucas. He shoved the phone toward Thornton. See, he's on his way. He's going to be here in less than an hour. Thornton gave the screen a passing glance, nothing more. Lucas, a text message doesn't verify anything. You could have anyone in your contacts saved as Dad. Now, here is precisely what is going to happen. Thornton leaned in, his voice dropping. You will go back to your class. You will find Mrs. Whitmore and apologize for your disrespectful behavior. Then, you will rewrite that entire assignment with information that is based in reality. After that, we can move on. Is that understood? Lucas felt a tremor start in his hands. You don't believe me. I believe you are craving attention, Lucas. I recognize the impulse. Kids who come from single-parent homes or from families where the parents are always working, they sometimes spin stories to feel special. It's a cry for help in its own way. My parents are married. My mom is a surgeon at Walter Reed. My dad, that is enough. Thornton stood up. Return to your classroom immediately, or I will be forced to call your parents for a formal disciplinary conference. And trust me, that's not something you want on your permanent record. Lucas rose from his chair, his body feeling heavy. His vision started to blur with tears he refused to shed. My father serves this nation, sir. He's been on 6 tours of duty. He has earned the right not to be called a liar. The principal's rigid expression seemed to soften for a fraction of a second, but then it was gone. Get back to class, Lucas. When Lucas re-entered room 204, the entire dynamic had shifted. The back and sides of the room were now filled with parents, all seated in a large semicircle of assorted chairs. Career day was in full swing. Mrs. Whitmore was at the front, introducing a Mr. Bennett. We are so very grateful to have our distinguished guest with us this morning. Mr. Bennett associates with some of the most influential people in all of Washington. Let's give him our undivided attention. A ripple of polite applause went through the classroom. Lucas tried to slip into his seat as inconspicuously as possible. Deshaun leaned over. You good, man? He whispered. Before Lucas could form a response, Mrs. Whitmore's voice sliced across the room. Lucas, is there something you'd like to share with the rest of us? Every head turned to face him. Students and parents alike, every eye was on him. Your apology, ma'am, she prompted. The bottom fell out of Lucas's stomach. The room became utterly still. This was no longer just his classmates. There were adults here, professionals, all gathered to witness his humiliation. A 10-year-old black boy, about to be forced to apologize for refusing to lie. I don't have anything to be sorry for, ma'am. A collective gasp filled the room. Several parents exchanged uneasy glances. Some of them looked deeply uncomfortable. Others glared at Lucas as if he were the height of insolence. Mrs. Whitmore's jaw went rigid. Excuse me? In front of our honored guests, you intend to continue with this defiance? It was Tyler's mother, a Ms. Bennett, a lawyer in a crisp gray suit, who spoke up gently. Perhaps we ought to let the young man explain himself. I appreciate your input, Ms. Bennett, but classroom discipline is my domain. Mrs. Whitmore's smile was professionally tight, but her eyes were cold and hard. Her gaze snapped back to Lucas. You have 2 options, young man. You can apologize this instant and rewrite your assignment honestly, or you can spend the rest of career day in the principal's office while your peers enjoy our presentation. Which is it going to be? Lucas's voice trembled when he spoke. When my dad gets here, your father isn't coming, Lucas. The words struck the air in the silent room like a slap. Parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some students stared down at their desks. Mrs. Whitmore went on, her tone adopting a veneer of strained patience. Sweetheart, I realize this is hard for you, But the truth is, your father probably has a perfectly normal job with the government. Maybe he works at the VA or does clerical work on a military base. Those are very respectable careers. She moved from the front of the room to stand beside his desk. But you have manufactured this elaborate fantasy about generals in Korea and high-stakes decisions because you're ashamed. I understand. You see Tyler's father meeting with senators, and you want your own family to feel that important. Her voice grew quieter, but the words became even more piercing. But Lucas, there is no shame in being ordinary. The shame is in dishonesty, especially when you come from a community that is already fighting stereotypes about truthfulness. And Miss Whitmore, Miss Bennett started, rising from her chair. I really don't believe this is... Please, have a seat, Miss Bennett. The lawyer reluctantly sat back down, a worried look etched on her face. Deshaun grumbled just loud enough to be heard. This is so messed up. Did you have something to say, Deshaun? Nothing, ma'am, he mumbled. I heard that, Deshaun Williams. To the principal's office. Now. But I didn't do anything. Now. With a sigh of defeat, Deshaun slung his backpack over his shoulder, giving Lucas a final, supportive glance before the hallway swallowed him up. And just like that, Lucas was an island in a sea of silent onlookers. Ms. Whitmore loomed over his desk, her arms folded across her chest. She was waiting for him to say he was sorry. The other adults in the room shuffled awkwardly, their gazes fixed anywhere but on him. No one dared to step in. The big clock on the wall ticked loudly, its hands pointing to 9:28 in the morning. His dad was supposed to be here in about 1 hour, but an hour felt like a lifetime away. In that crushing moment, Lucas Hughes felt like he could disappear entirely. His eyes fell to the smooth, empty surface of his desk. The spot where his assignment had been just moments before, now a memory torn to shreds. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the sides of his desk. Then, a surge of defiance took over, and he did the one thing no one, least of all himself, expected. He rose to his feet. Ma'am, his voice was quiet but steady. My name is Lucas Hughes. My father is General Vincent Hughes. He is a 4-star general in the United States Army. After 32 years of service, I think when he arrives, you'll find you're the one who needs to apologize. A dark crimson blush spread across Ms. Whitmore's face. Sit down. No, ma'am. A collective gasp seemed to suck the air out of the room. Lucas Hughes, if you don't put yourself back in that chair this instant... Her threat was cut short as the classroom door swung open. Principal Hayes hurried into the room, looking slightly winded. Miss Whitmore, the hallway, immediately! Her tone left no room for argument. Miss Whitmore blinked, taken aback. Principal Hayes, I'm dealing with a situation. Now, Patricia. A ripple of shock went through the parents. The principal had used her first name. That was unheard of. Looking bewildered, Ms. Whitmore followed the principal out, the door shutting behind them with a quiet, definitive click. Peering through the narrow window in the door, the class could see the two women speaking. Principal Hayes wore a grave expression. Miss Whitmore's face, on the other hand, morphed from confused to stunned, and finally to something that looked an awful lot like pure terror. Lucas slowly sat down, his heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't know what was going on, but he knew it was about him. The clock's hand swept past the 6. 9:30 a.m. Out in the hall, Principal Hayes's voice was low, but laced with steel. Patricia, we have a very serious situation. Ms. Whitmore folded her arms, a wall of defiance. If this is about Lucas Hughes, I was merely upholding the school's standards. That boy was obviously... I just concluded a 20-minute phone call with the protocol office at Fort Myers. The principal's words landed with the weight of stones. Miss Whitmore blinked slowly. The protocol office? That's right. They were calling to coordinate the arrival of an exceptionally distinguished guest. The principal then produced her phone and displayed an official email. They had to verify our security clearances, finalize special parking, and confirmed that we were prepared to handle his personal security detail. The color drained from Miss Whitmore's face. A security detail? For career day? For the father of Lucas Hughes? The walls of the hallway felt like they were closing in. Yes, Patricia. The 10-year-old boy you just shamed in front of his entire class because you assumed he was lying about his father being a four-star general. Oh my God, she breathed. The one you sent to my office? The same one whose homework you ripped to pieces. The child you accused of fabricating stories based on his address and his appearance. Miss Whitmore's hand flew to her mouth. No, I just thought he had to be exaggerating. He's from that little apartment complex. His father's name doesn't show up in any of the local society pages. There was no indication because high-ranking military officers deliberately keep a low profile for the safety of their families, Patricia. In her 15 years as an administrator, Principal Hayes had never once raised her voice to a member of her staff. That was about to change. I have just spent the last 30 minutes on a call with an exceedingly polite and yet incredibly firm aide-de-camp who wanted an explanation as to why one of my fourth graders was publicly branded a liar for being proud of his father's military career. Do you have any comprehension of the damage you have caused? Before Ms. Whitmore could answer, movement in the front driveway caught both their eyes. A convoy of 3 black SUVs was gliding to a halt in the school's drop-off circle. Men in sharp, dark suits emerged first. Hayes couldn't tell the difference between Secret Service or military police. They moved with an efficient, practiced grace, their eyes constantly sweeping their surroundings. Then, a man emerged from the rear door of the center vehicle, tall and carrying himself with an unmistakable air of authority, dressed in a full, formal military uniform. His dark blue jacket was perfectly pressed. Rows of gleaming medals adorned his chest, a testament to years of service, sacrifice, and command. Atop each shoulder, 4 silver stars glittered in the morning sun. General Vincent Hughes was here. Miss Whitmore felt a sudden weakness in her knees. Oh my God, he's real. Yes, Patricia, the principal confirmed grimly. He's very real. And he is currently walking toward the entrance of my school, presumably to see what's left after you shattered his son's morning. Back in the classroom, the activity outside had captured everyone's attention. Is that the president? One of the children whispered in awe. Whoa, look at all those guys in suits, another one added. Bennett, the lobbyist, shot to his feet and peered out the window, his eyes going wide. My God, he breathed. That's a 4-star general. A ripple of stunned whispers immediately spread through the room. Lucas was cemented to his chair. Through the classroom window, he watched his father approach the building with that same steady, deliberate gait he'd witnessed his entire life. He was wearing his full dress uniform. Now everyone would know. General Vincent Hughes strode through the main entrance of Jefferson Elementary as if he were reviewing an honor guard. His movements were composed and precise, his eyes taking in every single detail. He had instructed his security team to wait outside. This was not a military engagement. This was a father coming to see about his son. Principal Hayes intercepted him in the main corridor. General Hughes, sir, my name is Principal Hayes, and I want to express my deepest apologies. He took her offered hand in a grip that was firm but momentary. Principal Hayes, I appreciate you making time for me. My apologies for intruding on your schedule today. The words were professional, the tone controlled, but they were lined with steel. I was told there was a misunderstanding concerning my son's class project. Hovering behind the principal, Mrs. Whitmore stood perfectly still, her face ashen. General Hughes shifted his gaze to her, his expression not one of anger, but of cold assessment. Are you Lucas's teacher? Yes, sir, she stammered. Mrs. Whitmore, General, I am so sorry. There appears to have been a great deal of confusion. His voice never rose, because it didn't have to. My son was accused of being a liar in front of his classmates for speaking the truth about my service. Please explain to me precisely what was so confusing. Sir, I had no idea, she pleaded. I had no means of confirming his story. You made no attempt to confirm it. He let the silence hang in the air. You just assumed. Mrs. Whitmore had nothing to say. General Hughes went on, his voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. Ma'am, I have dedicated 3 decades of my life to leading soldiers. If there is one thing I have learned in that time, it is that making judgments about people, based on their appearance, their zip code, or your own preconceived notions, those judgments are almost always incorrect, and they are always, without exception, dangerous. He gave the bottom of his uniform jacket a slight tug. I have guided troops through war zones. I have briefed presidents and foreign dignitaries. I have been forced to make calls that have impacted the lives of thousands. But in this moment, my single most important duty is to my 10-year-old son, who was shamed for telling the truth. His eyes bored into hers. Where is Lucas? The classroom door opened, and Principal Hayes stepped through, her professional smile failing to conceal the sheer terror in her eyes. Class, we are fortunate to have a very special guest with us for the remainder of Career Day. Mrs. Whitmore shuffled in behind her, looking pale enough to faint. Then General Vincent Hughes stepped into the room, and the air itself seemed to change. An absolute silence fell. Not the typical quiet of a classroom, but the profound stillness of a cathedral. As one, every parent rose to their feet. Mr. Bennett, a man who regularly broke bread with senators, instinctively snapped his spine straight like a West Point cadet. Dr. Carter, a renowned surgeon, put her hand to her chest. The service members' families in the room knew the rank on sight. 4 stars. You just don't see a 4-star general visiting a 5th grade class. The instant Lucas saw his father, every wall he had built inside himself crumbled. "Dad," he whispered, his voice small, fractured, and overflowing with relief. For a fleeting moment, the general's ironclad military bearing faltered. His gaze found his son, tear-streaked and hollowed out, sitting alone at his desk. He crossed the room in 4 powerful strides, all thoughts of protocol and public perception gone. He dropped to one knee in front of the entire room, bringing himself to his son's level, and pulled the boy into a fierce, protective embrace. "I'm here, son. I'm here now. I'm so sorry it took me so long." Lucas pressed his face into his father's decorated uniform and finally let himself sob. The tears weren't from sadness anymore. They were the release of every ounce of shame he'd been forced to carry all morning. It was because his dad had come. It was because the truth was now standing there for everyone to see. The hug lasted maybe 10 seconds, but in that sliver of time, the gravity of what had happened that morning settled upon every adult in the room. They had watched a boy tell the truth and be torn down for it. General Hughes stood but kept his son's hand tightly in his and faced the audience. "Good morning. My name is General Vincent Hughes of the United States Army. I apologize for interrupting your career day, but I gave my son my word that I would be here, and I do not break promises to my son." His voice was calm, but every syllable carried the weight of a command. He threw a quick glance at Mrs. Whitmore, who looked as if she was trying to will herself to become invisible. "Ma'am, it's my understanding there was some doubt about Lucas's project." The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Mrs. Whitmore opened her mouth, but couldn't form a single word. Principal Hayes jumped in. "General Hughes, please, if you wouldn't mind sharing some of your experiences with the class, we would be incredibly honored." He gave a single, decisive nod. "Thank you." He turned back to the students, with Lucas still anchored to his hand. "My son wrote that I am a 4-star general who has served this country for 32 years. Every single word of that statement is true. I have led troops in both Iraq and Afghanistan. I have served in Korea, in Germany, and all across the United States. My current role involves helping to shape military strategy for the Joint Chiefs of Staff." The students' eyes went wide with awe. Lucas had also written that genuine leadership is defined by serving others, not oneself. He absorbed this lesson from his mother, Dr. Angela Hughes, a pediatric surgeon who saved children's lives while I was stationed on the other side of the world. It was a principle he learned through the hardship of moving 8 times, changing schools 6 times, and celebrating birthdays, Christmases, and Thanksgivings without me because I was deployed. He stopped, letting his gaze pass over each student in the room. My son was not exaggerating in his assignment. In fact, he was being modest. The true depth of what military families give up is far heavier than anything he could write on a piece of paper. His gaze then shifted to Mrs. Whitmore. When a child presents you with their truth, especially a truth that is hard to hear or one that defies your expectations, the first response should always be to listen, not to default to disbelief because what they're saying makes you uncomfortable. The room fell completely silent. Mrs. Whitmore's voice was barely a whisper when she spoke. General Hughes, I owe Lucas an apology, a genuine one. She turned to Lucas, tears carving paths down her face. Lucas, I was wrong. Absolutely and completely wrong. I made assumptions about you and your family that were based on my own prejudices and had nothing to do with who you are. I judged you. I refused to listen to you. I chose not to believe you, and I caused you pain. Her voice shattered. You deserve so much more from me. You deserve to have your truth believed. I am so very, very sorry. Lucas looked to his father, who gave him a slight, reassuring nod. It's your choice, son. Lucas drew a deep breath. Mrs. Whitmore, my dad always says that everyone makes mistakes. He says the only thing that matters is what you do after you've made them. The sheer wisdom of those words, spoken by a 10-year-old who had been utterly humiliated just hours before, struck everyone in the room. Maybe you could just try to believe kids more, even when their stories seem too big to be real. I will, Lucas. Mrs. Whitmore dabbed at her eyes. I promise you, I will. After Deshawn was brought back from the office, General Hughes shook his hand and expressed his gratitude for standing by Lucas. Kyler Bennett approached Lucas a short time later. I'm sorry I didn't do more to back you up earlier. That was incredibly brave, what you did. A group of other students began to surround Lucas, their expressions now filled not with pity, but with admiration. Mr. Bennett, the lobbyist, walked over to General Hughes. Sir, I deal with members of Congress every single day. That point you made about listening first, well, I needed to hear that too. Ms. Wilson, a custodian for the Capitol building, shook the general's hand, her own eyes glistening with tears. Thank you for what you said about all kinds of service being important. Principal Hayes then made a formal announcement to the classroom. Effective immediately, Jefferson Elementary is instituting mandatory and comprehensive implicit bias training for all faculty and staff. What took place this morning can never happen again. Mrs. Whitmore nodded, placing a hand over her heart. I'll be the first one to sign up. Then the general did something entirely unexpected. From his pocket, he withdrew a small, gold-colored medallion, a command coin from his unit, which was traditionally given to recognize exceptional service. He pressed it into Mrs. Whitmore's palm. Ma'am, I'm not giving you this because of what happened this morning. I am giving this to you for your apology. That required true courage. Use it as a reminder that our greatest growth comes from our mistakes, not from our successes. Mrs. Whitmore clutched the coin, nodding, too overcome with emotion to speak. For the following 20 minutes, General Hughes delivered a powerful presentation about service in the military, about leadership, and about sacrifice. He patiently answered questions from the intrigued students. He told stories appropriate for their age. He made every single child feel valued. And when he finished, Principal Hayes suggested they take a class photo. The students all swarmed around the general. Lucas stood right at the front and center, his hand clasped in his father's, wearing the brightest, happiest smile of his entire life. That picture would go viral across social media in less than 48 hours. But in that moment, it was nothing more than a son standing with his father, finally believed, finally justified, and finally seen for who he was. That evening, the Hughes family sat together inside their humble Arlington apartment, the very same one Mrs. Whitmore had used as proof that Lucas was a liar. Dr. Angela Hughes had left surgery ahead of schedule the moment Vincent had called to tell her what had transpired. She was still in her scrubs as she sat on the couch with Lucas tucked under her arm. General Hughes sat across from them, no longer in uniform, but back in a t-shirt and jeans. Just a dad again. "How are you feeling, my love?" Angela asked, gently smoothing Lucas's hair. "Tired?" Lucas leaned against his mother. "But good, I think." "What did you learn today?" his father asked him. Lucas mulled it over. His parents had consistently taught him to search for the lesson inside every difficult experience. "I learned that telling the truth can be really, really hard, especially when people are determined not to believe you, but that you have to do it anyway." Vincent gave a slow nod. "And what else? That just because people have the wrong idea about you, it doesn't mean you have to change yourself to be what they think you should be." Angela leaned over and kissed the top of his head. "That's a very wise thing to realize, Lucas." "But Dad," Lucas said, looking up at his father. "Yeah, son? Why didn't you just tell the school what you did from the start?" None of this would have happened then. It was a perfectly fair question, one Vincent had been turning over in his own mind all afternoon. He leaned in, resting his elbows on his knees. "Lucas, your value has absolutely nothing to do with my rank. You matter because of the person you are. You are kind, you are honest, and you are brave. I never, ever want you to think you need my achievements to feel important." He took a breath. "But I also see now that by trying to keep such a low profile, I put you in a terrible spot. You shouldn't have been forced to defend the truth all by yourself. So, what do we do now?" "Now," Vincent said, "we make certain this never happens again. Not to another kid at Jefferson Elementary. Not anywhere." 3 months later, Jefferson Elementary was a different place. Not on the outside, but the entire atmosphere inside had shifted. Every single member of the staff had gone through comprehensive, implicit bias training. It was non-negotiable. Principal Hayes had made it a condition of continued employment. The sessions covered racial bias, class bias, and the inherent danger of assumptions, using real-world scenarios to spark uncomfortable conversations and necessary growth. Mrs. Patricia Whitmore attended every single session. She did more than just participate, she helped lead them. In a faculty meeting 2 months after the whole incident, she stood before her peers and shared her side of the story. "3 months ago, I hurt a child because I was completely blind to my own assumptions. I looked at Lucas Hughes and dismissed his story as impossible simply because it didn't fit the picture I had in my head of what a general's family was supposed to look like." Her voice didn't waver. It was steady and stronger than before. "I've used these past few months to really examine my own biases, the ones I never even knew were there. I've learned that what I used to call my instincts about students was often just prejudice disguised as experience." She raised the command coin that General Hughes had given her. "I keep this on my desk, not as some kind of trophy, but as a reminder that true growth comes from our mistakes, not our successes." The training wasn't just talk. It sparked real changes in policy. The new protocol was simple. Verify before you question. If a student shared something about their family that seemed out of the ordinary, the first step was now to contact the parents, not to put the child on trial. Inspired by what Lucas went through, the Student Council launched the Truth and Trust Initiative, a peer support network where kids could talk about times they felt unheard or disbelieved. Lucas, naturally, became one of its founding members. Mrs. Whitmore's classroom felt different too. On her first day back, she gathered her students to draft a new classroom charter. The kids all had a hand in writing it, and it now hung on the wall in big, bold letters. "In this class, our first step is to believe. We question with respect. We will never assume someone is lying just because their truth sounds unbelievable. Everyone's story matters." Every single student put their name on it, Lucas included, especially Lucas. Mrs. Whitmore also started a monthly family story circle, where students could share things about their families without any fear of judgment. The point wasn't to compare or compete. It was simply to listen and to learn from one another. During one session, Sophia Wilson shared how much pride her mother took in cleaning the Capitol building, how she knew every hall and office by heart, and that senators sometimes asked her for facts about the building's history. Mrs. Whitmore listened with new ears. Now she could hear the genuine pride in Sophia's voice instead of dismissing her mother's work as less important than other professions. Deshawn described how his dad could diagnose any car problem just by the sound of the engine, and how he'd built his little mechanic shop from nothing. Tyler Bennett surprised everyone when he said that his dad's lobbying job seemed less important after meeting General Hughes, and that he'd started to think about what service really meant. And as for Lucas, he talked about military families, about the sacrifices, about the kids who are always moving, always missing their parents, but who find the strength to keep going anyway. The whole class listened without a single interruption. That was the biggest change of all, the listening. The photo went viral faster than anyone could have possibly expected. The image was powerful. General Hughes in his full dress uniform, 4 stars glinting on his shoulder, kneeling beside his 10-year-old son, while emotional students and parents looked on. The caption told the whole story. It described how a teacher had called a black student a liar for simply writing about his father's service. It explained how she'd torn up his assignment, humiliated him in public, and how a 4-star general had then walked into that very classroom to stand by his son. News outlets seized the story. It appeared on local channels first, then was broadcast across the nation. Social media platforms exploded with reactions. Some people focused on the racism, others on the classism, but countless people commented on the immense courage it took for Lucas to stand his ground. But the part of the story that truly resonated with people was Mrs. Whitmore's apology and her genuine transformation. We're all tired of stories where the bad guy gets punished, but never actually grows. This was something else entirely. It showed that real redemption is possible. 3 months later, invitations started arriving for Mrs. Whitmore to speak at education conferences about implicit bias. She accepted a few and turned down others. But every time she spoke, her message was the same. I am not the hero of this story. I am the cautionary tale. But I'm also proof that people can change if they are willing to do the incredibly hard work. Today's Lucas is a world away from the scared 10-year-old boy who stood at the front of that classroom. He has a newfound confidence, though he's still humble and kind. But he is no longer afraid to speak his truth. He created a peer mentoring program at Jefferson Elementary, where older kids guide younger ones through difficult social situations. The program's #1 rule: believe first, then question with kindness. His friendship with Deshawn only deepened. Tyler Bennett became a regular at their lunch table, and even Sophia Wilson eventually joined their circle. They started calling themselves the Truth Squad, a group of kids who made a pact to listen to one another's stories without passing judgment. General Hughes made a point to attend school events whenever his schedule allowed, not in his uniform, but just as Lucas's dad. He wanted his son to know he was proud of him for the person he was, not because of what his father did for a living. Dr. Angela Hughes was still saving lives at Walter Reed, but she made a point to be at every single one of Lucas's presentations about military families, because she knew that's what this was all about. It wasn't about generals or ranks or titles, but about a family that loved one another, and about a son who learned that defending the truth, even when it's difficult, is always the right thing to do. The Hughes family eventually settled back into their quiet life, but Jefferson Elementary, and every person who heard Lucas's story, was forever changed by it. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can possibly do is stand firm in your own truth, especially when the entire world is telling you that you are wrong. The story of Lucas Hughes is just one child's experience in one single classroom in Arlington, Virginia. Yet, it holds up a mirror to a much larger issue that unfolds in schools all across America every day. Right now, at this very moment, a child is being told their experience isn't valid because it doesn't align with someone else's expectations. A black student is being interrogated far more harshly than their white classmates. A child from a working-class home is being waved off because the adults in the room assume they must be exaggerating. A military kid is being completely misunderstood because people fail to see the immense sacrifice hiding behind their quiet composure. And almost always, there is no 4-star general who is going to walk through that door to make things right. So the question for all of us becomes, what do we do about it? The statistics are absolutely sobering. According to the United States Department of Education, Black students are suspended or expelled at 3 times the rate of white students for the exact same offenses. The overwhelming majority of these disparities stem from subjective offenses, things like defiance or disruption. Let's translate that. When a teacher has to make a judgment call about whether a student is being disrespectful, Black students are punished far more severely. The very same study discovered that 72% of teachers have never once received training in how to recognize their own implicit biases. They are making decisions that shape children's futures based on assumptions they don't even realize they have. Another study from the American Psychological Association revealed that Black boys as young as 10 years old are viewed as less innocent and more adult-like than their white peers. They are given less benefit of the doubt, less grace, and frankly, less of a childhood. Lucas Hughes collided with all of this in a single morning, and his story shows us the real-world cost. Children who are made to feel unheard at school are 4 times more likely to completely disengage from their education. They stop raising their hands. They stop sharing their stories. They stop believing their own truth even matters. That is the invisible damage of bias. It is not just about the one moment of humiliation, but about the slow, steady erosion of a child's belief in themselves. But Lucas's story also reveals something else. It shows us that change is absolutely possible, that people can grow. It shows that systems can improve, but only when we demand better from them. Mrs. Whitmore could have easily denied what she did. She could have made 1,000 excuses. She could have blamed Lucas for being too sensitive. Instead, she chose to do the harder thing. She looked her own biases square in the face. She apologized with sincerity. She completely changed her classroom and her entire approach to teaching. That doesn't erase the harm, but it does show a path forward. Jefferson Elementary could have tried to sweep the entire incident under the rug. Instead, they mandated bias training. They rewrote their policies. They built new systems to prevent it from ever happening again. That is how institutions get better, by acknowledging the harm they caused and taking concrete steps to prevent future harm. And Lucas, he could have let that experience shrink him, make him small and quiet. Instead, he started a peer mentoring program. He shared his story. He helped other kids learn how to find their own voice. That, right there, is the definition of resilience. His strength wasn't a product of his trauma. It came from his choice to use that pain to lift others up. So where do you go from here? It begins with looking inward and asking some tough questions. When someone shares their reality with you, especially if they're from a community that's often ignored, is your gut reaction to trust them, or do you start searching for holes in their story? When a kid tells you about something amazing or out of the ordinary they did, do you celebrate them instantly? Or do you wonder if they might be bending the truth? When you witness an injustice happening right in front of you, do you find your voice, or do you swallow your words just to avoid a little discomfort? These questions might sting, but facing them is crucial. Second, you have to do something. For all the parents out there, be the one to start the conversation about implicit bias training at your child's school. Inquire about the exact measures in place to shield students from prejudice. If you're an educator, take a hard look at your own classroom. Is every single student getting the same clean slate? Or are your own hidden biases influencing your actions? And if you're simply a person who felt something watching this, pass the story along. Culture shifts when we start having these conversations. The more we talk about what's difficult, the more impossible it becomes to ignore. And finally, we have to teach the kids in our lives that their perspective is valid, that they never have to make themselves smaller just so a grown-up can feel bigger, and that owning their own story, especially when it's terrifying, is one of the bravest things they will ever do. General Vincent Hughes didn't go to Jefferson Elementary that day to put a teacher on blast. He went to stand with his son, to prove to Lucas and every kid watching that your story has weight and that you have worth. So now the ball is in your court. What will you do with this? Are you going to just swipe past and let this memory fade by tomorrow? Or will you allow it to transform how you listen, how you trust, and how you engage with the world around you? Because this is the hard truth Lucas Hughes had to learn at just 10 years old. One single person armed with their truth can dismantle an entire system, but only when the rest of us are actually prepared to listen. If this story hit home for you, do three things. 1. Share it. Someone you know probably needs to see this today. 2. Leave a comment below. Was there ever a time you were told you were lying or saw someone else's reality get dismissed? Your experience matters. 3. Hit subscribe and turn on those notifications. This is what our channel is all about. Stories of justice, redemption, and having the courage to stand up for what's right. Don't forget, your truth has value. You have value. Don't ever let anyone make you think otherwise.